Hi, it's Natasha. Don't forget to keep listening to Voice It Out podcast.
Hey, this is Amrita and I'm back with Voice It Out podcast. We are back with season 3. The main part of our conversations is that we want to make sure we're having important discussions on important topics such as mental health, etc. that affects and kind of is maybe not talked about so much in the British Asian community. We want to put those conversations at the forefront, and season 3 will be all about that once again. So today I am welcoming a very exciting guest who we interacted during season 2 of the podcast, and we had to have her on season 3. So it's Natasha Mahtani, and I will go through the amazing things that she has done in her career. Hi, Natasha.
Hi, Amrita. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you for coming. How are you doing?
I am really well. The sun is shining. What more can you ask for?
I'm so glad you said that, because we usually start our episodes talking about the weather.
Oh my God, it's such an English thing to do.
Exactly that. So I'm just going to say that, first of all, you are a relationship coach.
I am.
But I feel like that is not the only thing that you do. That is not even encompassing half of the stuff that you've done. So I'm going to mention some of your accolades, if you don't mind, and feel free to jump in if you want to kind of explain it or kind of expand on it if you like.
Sure.
So you are essentially passionate about empowering women and basically, I would say, I was going to say retraining, but basically what you have said is you kind of work with men of colour to kind of maybe teach them or get them out of the cultural patterns that our community kind of places on all of us, not just men of colour, even women of colour have that.
Women,
yeah. And then you are basically, you talk about challenging gender stereotypes maybe, or the conditioning that we have when we're growing up, and you've also lived in so many places. And I thought that was amazing. So obviously, apart from England, you've lived in, I'm just giving an example, you lived in Hong Kong, you lived in Liberia, Nigeria,
India, Ireland.
Wow. That's amazing, like literally an international citizen.
Yeah.
You've also spoken at many events across the globe. Can I just ask, what kind of topics have you spoken about? Is it to do with relationship coaching and related topics?
Yeah, so you were totally right when you said you're a relationship coach, but I feel like it's so much more than that. And I have always really struggled to kind of succinctly say what it is that I do. But what I've realized in the last couple of weeks, actually, is that where my passion lies is culture. So having lived in all these different places and experiencing different cultures, and then working, when I was in Hong Kong, working with a company that relocated people. So for the big banks like JP Morgan and, pharmaceutical companies like Merck, you really started to see how culture affected people, especially when they were making moves from, like the US, and they'd only ever lived there and they were coming into Hong Kong or China or Taiwan. It's all the nerves that come with that. And then when I moved to the UK, I worked within global mobility, so the same sort of thing. And so you start to see how culture affects and defines people. And so even within my coaching space, like I started out as a life coach, and then I became an accredited divorce coach, and that's a whole other conversation.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, but I did that because, having experienced it myself, I realized that there was such a taboo still attached to it, and such a stigma, and that there were so many people who were staying in really difficult situations purely because of fear, culture, and just worrying about what society would think. But the more I did that, the more I realized that if people had seen a relationship coach whilst, in their relationship, often they wouldn't need to get divorced, because you start to pick up on those patterns and you start to unravel all that cultural conditioning that shows up in your relationship. So I went on and did some training to be a relationship coach. I still speak about divorce only because, to me, having been through the experience myself, and now with quite a few clients who are going through it, some who've been married for like 26 years, 34 years, I just want to hold space for those people. I really want to hold space for those people, because I'll have some clients who'll say, well, I look around and I don't see anyone who's divorced and happy. And I'm like, you're looking at someone. And I remember one of my clients said, you felt all those feelings? And I was like, every single one, every feeling that you've described, I've felt. But you can come out the other side. So it's really important to me to hold space for those people. But yeah, essentially culture is at the heart of everything, all the coaching that I do.
That's so interesting, because the first question that came into my head when you were explaining all the different countries and how culture affects everyone, I wanted to ask you, do you actively have to think about how is culture affecting, or did you just see that this is literally a cultural kind of pattern that I'm seeing?
Yeah, I think when you live in different places and you kind of acclimatize to that place, you start to sort of blend into that culture. Or maybe not everybody does, but I think for me, I'm very much like, okay, if I live here, I'm really going to like learn about the culture, embrace it, try and not just exist as who I am in this place. Like when I lived and still spend a lot of time in Nigeria, for example, it's not just, oh, I'm an expat living in Nigeria, I'm not going to, give myself that opportunity to get to know what Nigerian culture is. I'm very much like, oh, let me, get to know Nigerian people, make some friends, meet people, understand their culture. I think that just comes down to me being a really curious person. Like I'm really, really curious. I'll ask questions, and want to find out about what people's lives are like. I'm quite fascinated. And I think living in the different places, I started to piece things together. It was like, oh, okay, wait. In Asia and like, the Far East, they do this within their culture. But hold on, they do something very similar in Nigeria. And then they do something very similar in India. And so then I started to look at how is culture affecting us, even though someone who's Nigerian would say, oh, I'm quite different from someone who's Chinese. But actually, it also made me realize that we're far more similar than we are different. And I think that's something the world needs to learn, especially at the moment.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. There are a lot of similarities between cultures as well, and even just people in them.
Yeah.
You don't realize that. That's what I was going to say, that actually you seem to be at an advantage, so to speak, because you've kind of lived in those cultures and kind of experienced them, talk to the people, as you say. And because you are curious, do you think it gives you a better, like an advantage, I guess that is the right word, when you are coaching or when you are giving relationship advice, for example?
Yeah, I think so, because culture underpins how we feel about so much. I'll give you an example. I had a client once, and she was Ghanaian, and she was married to, in her words, very like middle class English guy, and he was quite quiet. He'd been raised by a single mom, and she came from this really like, stereotypical Ghanaian family that was really loud, and they were having issues over something like the dishes, right? So they decided that they would divvy up the tasks. And on the days that he had to do the dishes, he would just leave a mug in the sink and come to it at the end of the day and do the washing up. And it was driving her crazy that the mug was in the sink. So I was trying to break it down. I'm like, all right, can you see the mug? And she was like, no. Oh. I'm like, okay, so then what's the problem? And, at the end of, we kind of coached her through it and asked her tons of questions. And then at the end of it, she was like, but I know it's there. And I'm like, okay, how does that make you feel? And we started breaking it down. And what came out of it was, in her household and as a part of her culture, it was a woman's job to keep the house a certain way. And if the house was not that way or not tidy, it made you a bad wife. Right. And so even though she was not in that situation at all anymore, she was not within that culture within her home, she'd gotten married to someone who was completely different, that cultural conditioning, she couldn't take away from that. You know what I mean? That was affecting her relationship. And it seems so trivial, right? It's a mug in the sink. It's a deep sink. You cannot see the mug. But when it comes to cultural conditioning, it's so unconscious and it's so deeply buried in our subconscious that we don't actually realize how it's affecting us until we start to break it down. And we're like, and then you have to just say to yourself, okay, I don't believe that. Like, is that fact? Do I believe that I'm a bad wife if there is a few dishes in the sink? No. She's like, no, I don't. And I'm like, but it's affecting your relationship, So yeah, breaking that down, you kind of realize just how much it governs our life.
I think that's so interesting, because I think all of us have that in a certain way, that we have that conditioning, and this one thing kind of just sticks in your head, even though it's not relevant now, or it's not part of you as a person. It might be part of your parents or whoever it is, your sibling or whoever it is. And you've kind of taken it on as if, no, that's the right thing, or that's the wrong thing. It's so funny that I feel like, personally, I've become more conscious of those things purely because I've tried to break it down myself. Obviously, sometimes you need another person like a coach or a therapist or someone like that to help you. I try to do it as much as I can in myself to think, hold on, the crux of my personality is not that. So where is that coming from? But do you think when you are talking to people and when you are interacting with people who have this kind of conditioning, do you think it's quite hard for them to identify in themselves, like you said in this example? Or do you think some people find it easy but then don't know what to do with it to break it down?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think, like you, I'm one of those people who kind of thinks it through and thinks to myself, oh, okay, that's where it's coming from. But I always say, like, every good coach has a coach. I have a coach, because we can't often see things ourselves in a way that someone objective can see it for us. Or sometimes we can see it, but we have too much fear, so the fear kind of just ends up, in order to protect us, like the fear and anxiety, in order to protect us, ends up leading us to kind of a freeze state, and then we don't do anything. And I've had that before. I've had that where I'm like, if I just do nothing and just stand here and do nothing, nothing's going to happen, nothing can go wrong because I do nothing. And that's why, having that objective person is really beneficial, just to kind of take that veil off and show us maybe another side of things. But also with a lot of online stuff, I find that people tell you what you should be doing. So all those realizations come, but you're right. No one tells you how do you do it. And I think that's where a coach can come in, give you a couple of tools, kind of put a few tools in your toolbox so that, and I always say, once you have them, they're always there. You might forget about them. So if I say to someone, okay, I want you to have a gratitude practice, or I want you to do some visualization, or I want you to, script out your perfect day, you might use them now and forget, but you may need 3 years down the line, you might be like, oh, I remember that, and use that. Like, once you have it, you have it. You might not use it all the time, but it's there for you for when you do need it.
So, if you do kind of, in a way, prescribe someone to do something like that, like a gratitude journal or something like that, what kind of difference do you see? Because I'm one of those people, and I think a lot of us do this. I don't know, a lot of people will identify with what I'm saying. You start off and you're really gung-ho about this thing, and then a week later it's like, I don't have time, I'll do it tomorrow, and then you just kind of end up leaving it. But you know how much it benefits you. But life kind of gets in the way.
Yeah.
So how much would you say that if you kept it up and you were consistent, how much can that help you?
It's massive. It's huge. The shifts that you can feel if you put some of these things in place is huge. But I always say you need to be flexible about it. And you also need to think about where your priorities lie. So I'll give you an example. Someone might say, I don't have the time to have a gratitude practice, or I come home from work really late, I'm really tired, I don't have the time to do this. So I would say to someone, are you commuting to work? Like, are you cycling where you can't use your phone, or are you on the tube? If you're on the tube, you can literally take 3 minutes and write it down in the notes section of your phone. Like, it doesn't need to be this, let me sit down, put on some calming music, take out my journal, write the date and write down. And sometimes I get really frustrated when I see stuff like that on Instagram, because I'm like, that is amazing, but that's not realistic for a lot of people. It depends on the kind of job you have. It depends on if you have children, do you have one child or do you have 3 children? Are they keeping you busy? Do you have a housekeeper, or are you coming home and, having to make dinner and then wash up and tidy up and, all of those things. So take time when you're commuting on the tube. Or another thing that I do a lot, if I find that I've just had an exhausting day, I haven't got around to it, is when I get into bed, I literally just lie there and say out loud 5 things that I'm grateful for. That takes me all of 15 to 20 seconds. So the question is, do you have 15 to 20 seconds in your day? Because that's all it will take. And what you want to do with that is almost like ground yourself, and you're just saying thank you to whoever, whether you believe in like the universe, source, God, like whatever you imagine, sometimes thanking your angels, depending on what you believe in. It's just taking that moment to show appreciation and gratitude. And that can be really powerful in shifting your energy and shifting how you feel, especially when you're not feeling great, right? Because when you're not feeling great, you're like, I don't have anything to be grateful for today. I had a really hard day. And I'm like, just say thank you that I'm alive today. Thank you that I had food on my plate. Thank you that I'm breathing. And thank you for my health. That's it. 4 things.
That's so true, because I do feel like I was just thinking as you were trying to explain that it's literally 15 to 20 seconds. And I was thinking to myself, for example, if you were going through a life event or you've got a really big project on at work, and like me, I've just said, I don't have time for this. I'm like, literally, when I say I don't have time for it, I mean I don't have the headspace. It's not actually time,
Yeah.
because you can literally do it, as you said, before
Yeah.
you go to sleep, when you first lie in bed, or even when you first wake up. I've tried to do it when I first wake up before, and just take like 1 minute to just think about all the things I'm grateful for. And I just came out of the habit. I don't know what it was. I just, like it was either, I don't know. I guess it is a matter of being consistent, and it doesn't have to be every day. Consistency obviously is not every day. And sometimes it could be you have a list of 10, but that day you want to do a list of 3. And I think for me, I'm quite hard on myself that if I can't do it every day, what's the point? Like, like in your head, you're just like, I need to be able to do this every day. Come on, it's only 10 to 15 seconds or whatever.
Yeah.
And once you come out of that habit, you kind of are hard. Like, I think I'm hard on myself and be like, okay, do I deserve anything to be grateful for, kind of thing? Do you see what I mean? And I think a lot of people do end up in that kind of cycle of thinking that, oh yeah, it's great, let's do it. And like 1 week later, it's like, oh, okay, I have to do it. And then you just come out of that because you think to yourself, I'm just so busy and I don't have the headspace. So I think for people like me, who realistically it is an excuse, I think, what would you say that you said it's 15 to 20 seconds. What would you say to kind of kickstart that and make sure that we, I guess, are consistent?
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean every day. It could mean 3 times a week, for example.
Yeah. So a couple of things. The first thing is, if you feel that you're feeling overwhelmed and don't sort of have the bandwidth, I hear you. Sometimes I have to say that to my 12-year-old. He will always come and say things to me. It's like 10 o'clock and he's like, can we do this tomorrow? And then can you do that? And then can you transfer this to my account? And I'm like, I don't have the bandwidth for this right now. And he's like, all right. So, I would say have some compassion. The other thing is just take the 10 seconds before you think I want to do this to kind of put your hand on your heart, put another hand on your stomach, take a deep breath in, exhale, and center yourself. Because a big part of what we're experiencing, and this goes into a much deeper conversation about how social media, how our phones and how the world around us is affecting us. So, I'd say 80 to 100 years ago, if you read a newspaper from like sort of cover to cover, I think it is, that's like now you're getting that sort of information within 1 or 2 minutes when you're, thing. Whereas like back then it would be like what you consumed, that would be an entire year's worth of information. And now it's a lot more. So I think centering yourself to take yourself out of that, like, oh my God, there's so much going on. And then maybe do your gratitude. But also I'll give you another visual, because I said this to my best friend the other day and she was like, oh my God, that really works. This was in relation to food and diet, but I think it works the same way. People love to say like, oh, I was doing that practice, gratitude practice, and this, that, and the other, and I fell off the wagon and I thought, why bother? I'm just not going to continue doing it, like whatever. And I say, actually, see it as you staying on the wagon. It's just that you've brought other stuff onto this wagon of yours. So you didn't fall off. You're on it. It's just other priorities came and took place. And then when you deal with them and those priorities have gone, your practice is still there.
I love that.
Yeah, your practice is still there. So it takes away that, what you described as that like, that lack of self-love, that shame, like all of those emotions. And I think that's the thing. We just want to give ourselves empathy, as much empathy as we'd give someone else. So if a friend said, I was doing this gratitude practice and I just stopped and I got really busy with this and I have to get back onto it, you would most likely say to that person, that's okay. These things happen. Life gets busy. Like, it's okay. Just start tomorrow. I always say, don't wait until Monday. Just start tomorrow.
Yeah.
So give yourself the same empathy that you would give a friend. And just remember, you stay on the wagon. It's just that other things come onto it.
That's I like that. I think I'm going to remember that even visually as an image of a wagon. Because
Yeah.
I like doing visual stuff and kind of seeing myself in it. And there's various things that I've learned, like just talking to people visually, that you can do even when you're kind of feeling a bit overwhelmed, which I think this image, actually, the one that you've given,
I love
is really
analogies.
powerful.
Yeah, they just help me see things clearly.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. So I was going to ask you, actually, where you said that, when you're feeling overwhelmed, I wanted to ask you, actually, on a personal level, but also kind of in your kind of area of work, when we have like really big events happening in the world, I know that mental health is it affects a lot of people. For example, when the Russia invaded Ukraine, that was a time I think everyone was just, like we say, we consume the news all the time as opposed to just in a newspaper once a day. it affects people's mental health, even if you're not directly affected. Have you come across instances in the people that you kind of talk to or your clients where that kind of thing has overtaken how they feel about the world, themselves, their own personal lives? Because I find that really interesting, because I did feel like a really low period myself when that one thing happened, maybe when it was 9/11 or like a really big world event. But you don't actually know. I didn't know how to navigate. Like, should I be feeling like that? It's not directly affected me. But how would you go about that? Has that increased, for example? Sorry, that's my first question. And how do you go about dealing with those kind of feelings?
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that and mentioned 9/11. So a few things here. The first thing is there were studies done after 9/11, specifically with regards to people who watched the Twin Towers coming down, that didn't know anyone who passed, that weren't even in New York, that didn't even have anyone they knew who lived in New York, you know, who they may have been afraid for, and they developed PTSD. I don't watch the news at all.
Okay.
Yeah, at all. I haven't watched the news for a very, very long time. Sometimes I can't avoid it because stuff pops up on Instagram. Where possible, I try and curate my Instagram to not see that sort of things. I'm not afraid to mute friends if they're sharing stuff that I just don't want to see. And to give you a visual, and this was like during COVID, I remember saying to a lot of clients, imagine that you are in a room, you know, that has a tap, or in a bathroom, and it's flooding and the water is like right up to like your chin, and it's moving up, and you're feeling that feeling of like, oh my God, I'm going to suffocate, I'm going to drown. What would you do? And they're like, oh, we'll just turn the tap off. And I'm like, exactly.
You don't see it as that easy though, do we? When we're actually in it.
It is, yeah. Just turn the thing off that is causing you that feeling in your body, and tap into your body. Like, where are you feeling it? How are you feeling it? Do you like what you're feeling? You know, so during COVID, there were people who were feeling serious anxiety, but insisted on watching like Boris Johnson's 5 o'clock news.
That was literally me.
Oh.
That's the only thing I would let myself consume in one day if I needed to. If I didn't, then I wouldn't.
But the thing is, watching that didn't change anything we had to do. We knew that we had to be careful. We knew that we had to, like, you know, we couldn't go out and about, or you could go for your one walk or your one run. We knew that we had to wear masks. We knew that our kids couldn't go to school, that we had to work remotely, that you had to sanitize anything coming into your home, however you chose to do it.
Yeah.
Actually, we did not need to watch that news.
No,
we did not need to know the numbers. It made no difference to our lives to know the numbers. And that kind of fear gets into your cells. That kind of fear gets into your cells, which is why we have a mental health crisis at the moment, because, you know, fear is not like it was back in the day when we kind of, you know, with evolution and stuff, where it was just, oh, I'm fearful that like a tiger is going to come and chase me. We now have fears like staring us in the face constantly. You know, I'll give you an example. Like when I was coming here, it's like, oh, take off all your jewelry, don't wear anything worth anything, don't carry any of your nice handbags, put your phone in your pocket, you know, don't be out and about. And I remember having to say to people, please stop talking to me about this stuff. Like, I just need to trust that I'm vigilant and I'm wary. And if something happens, it's not my fault. Like, that I just wrong place, wrong time, you know, and that it wasn't because I had my phone out. It wasn't because I was carrying a nice bag. You hear people who aren't, and, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
But you literally have to stop people. And to give you another visual, I told you I love them. And this is actually from a book which, if you haven't read, or if anyone hasn't read, everybody should read it, especially women. It's Untamed by Glennon Doyle.
I've heard of this, but I've not read it.
Absolutely fantastic, especially for women. But she talks about how when it comes to her family, she's like, I love them very much, but I have a drawbridge that goes up. And I remember a couple of years ago, I did it to my own family. They were talking, I started like putting my hands up, and they were like, what are you doing? Quite literally. Because sometimes the visual needs to be very apparent. Yeah. You know, you can say, please don't tell me these things, I don't want fear in my life. But I was like, put my hands up, and I was like, that's my drawbridge going up. No fear is allowed in here. No fear. I will not hear it, because I do not want that within me. You know, and they were kind of like, okay. But it worked, because they listen, and they know that I'm just not going to, you know, listen to certain things, because I just don't want to have any of that, you know, any of that fear like deep within my cells. And, you know, to the point of like sort of culturally, a lot of people want to be able to tell their families, like even if they're, especially in the South Asian community, like, I don't want to hear this. Like, this is really hard for me to hear. But it's like, you can't say that. You have to respect your elders. You can't say this to them.
Yeah, there's all these things that you have going on.
And culture pops up again.
Yeah, it's a cultural
And then it
thing.
pops up. And then you're like, oh, I can't say anything. And now there's a whole host of people that I see who are almost angry at their parents. And you really don't need to be. You just need to vocalize it, speak it out, voice it out, right? Voice it out podcast.
Yes, exactly.
And not in a way because that's the other thing with regards to culture is guilt comes in.
I was just about to say that because that was one of our very, very first episodes in season 1. Why do women feel guilty prioritizing themselves?
Yeah.
And exactly what you're saying. I think there is a level of guilt that definitely generates, like my mum's generation, for example, or even before that. There's a lot of guilt attached to putting yourself first, not being with your family the whole time, not looking after whoever it is in your family that you kind of need to look after. That level of guilt, I would like to think in our generation or my generation, we are more conscious of it. And maybe we're trying to do something about it, maybe not doing it. But our boundaries, I think the boundaries that we set, we have to be confident in setting them as well. When you said about the drawbridge, I literally thought to myself, it takes a level of confidence to do that, even though what you are doing is protecting your own self from whatever it might be. It does take a level of confidence and a level of kind of, I don't care what the opposite person is saying, I need to do this for myself. And I think we find that really difficult in our community.
Yeah, we do. But I always say to people, boundaries is not for the other person, the boundaries for you.
Yeah.
And boundaries should be put in place with utmost compassion. Utmost compassion. We're not trying to tell the other person to change. We're not trying to tell the other person what they shouldn't be saying, because that's up to them. That's up to them to change. We're telling them what we're not willing to have in our space, what we're not willing to hear. And I think if you kind of, with a parent, it's obviously a little bit harder, but I think if you sit down and, and you really sort of break it down, and not in a, let's sit down, I can't have you talking to me like this, that's not the way things are, but just this is how it's making me feel, and you drip feed it. You drip feed it. So you might just be talking to like your mum one day and be like, oh, I heard this and it's such a pity that happens. Or, you're talking to your dad and you're just drip feeding it. You're saying something else, but giving your opinion. Because then it kind of starts to seep in, and it takes time. It's a process, but I think it's worth it, because a lot of people say, oh, what's the point of saying anything? They're old, they're not going to listen. What's the point of saying anything? They're not going to change. And I don't believe that. I think that people can change until their very last breath. They might not want to. They might do it begrudgingly.
Yeah.
But if you don't try, how do you know?
This is it's exactly what you just said, because I literally sat there and was like, but yeah, some people don't want to. And I think that takes just a little bit more time maybe, and maybe more effort, right?
Yeah.
But fingers crossed.
You got to try. And if it doesn't work, that's fine. But if one day it works and they've moved even an inch, it was worth it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That is very true.
Yeah.
Very, very true. So I was going to ask actually about the COVID period and how you've noticed things might have changed in your area of work, because I think a lot of us can definitely say the world is very different after having that pandemic.
Yeah.
But during what we kind of went through in those kind of 2 years, so to speak, it might have been less than 2 years for some people, we changed, I think, as a world community, if you like. We became more compassionate. We had more time for each other because we literally didn't have anything else to do.
Yeah.
And there was a part of so many people that was like, we need to remember this and we need to retain it when the world kind of goes back to normal. And I think some of it we have, and some of it we absolutely haven't. So have you found like actual proper like changes in the area of work that you kind of deal with every day, in people or maybe in thinking? Have you found that?
Yeah. Should I tell you a secret?
Of course.
I really miss COVID. Like, I don't miss COVID. I take that back. I really miss that period. I think there was something so beautiful about it. And that, let me just caveat that by saying that's not to take away from anyone who experienced loss. I didn't experience any direct loss at the time, but not taking away from that, I think the world, like you said, became almost like a kinder and more compassionate place.
It did.
I think people just so I really lucky where I live here. I live in this like square with there's 39 houses, and it's in a square. And every day when the kids were done, with school, they'd all come out. And do you remember we had like the most phenomenal weather from April all the way to
we
September?
did.
It was like,
and it was like the moment we can't go out.
It
the
was
kind of few
so
months
bizarre because I've never seen. I've never seen like 4 months or 4.5 months of pure sunshine here. And the kids would go out and they would play. And obviously the parents would go out with them, and we'd say, 6 feet, guys, like 6 feet, keep some space. Because obviously we have some elderly neighbors and we wanted to like respect that and stuff. But we were so lucky in that we had a community. And all through that, even when the kids went to bed at 8 o'clock and they were all fed and they'd gone to bed, a couple of us would come out and sit with our chairs in a circle, in a big circle, and just drink wine and chat until like midnight. And I think that community and the way people had compassion for each other, it's like you heard all the best of the stories. People would talk about what they did for their neighbors and how they found the time to like help out an elderly neighbor, maybe go shopping for them or whatever. And I feel like we've come out the other side worse than when we went in. I feel like the world has become such a divisive, such a divisive place. And in some ways, COVID taught people or showed people or gave them the perspective rather that life is too short, so do what you have to do. And I think that within the coaching space, I see that. There's a lot of people who are frustrated, maybe while they were in lockdown, especially their relationships and stuff. You're not used to being with your partner or with your kids 24/7 for like 2 or 3 months. So we've seen a lot of breakdown in relationships since then. And I think it all comes down to communication, but not just communication with comprehension. Because you can communicate, right? I can say something to you, but if you are not comprehending, they say communication is key, and I'm like, no, comprehension is key.
So true.
Because if you are not comprehending what I'm saying, then you're going to see it through your lens and your perspective, even though I'm seeing it through a completely different, perspective. And so I think that is the key piece post-COVID that I'm seeing in, within the coaching space and relationships. It's just a sort of frustration, almost at the world, and, a lack of communication. I think we have to be overtly compassionate and empathetic. Now, I think we need to make a huge effort to be those people we were, back then, and go the extra mile and stuff like that. And also turn off the news, because like with everything going on now with the world, for example, with the genocide and stuff, there are so many ways you can help that don't just necessarily mean sharing stuff across social media, because there's so many other ways that you can help that, I think, that's not going to lead to all of us putting ourselves into a state of complete and utter terror.
Yeah, this is true. And you're right. The world is not a great place at the moment. And maybe it's not... I think for me, because I think the world isn't a great place at the moment, and I don't avoid the news so much because I need it in my day job, but I do try to limit the amount of news that I have. And so you're right, if I see people sharing on social media, I have actually muted a couple of accounts, because even though it's important for them, I don't need to consume it, kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think we need to identify what we are actually consuming or letting ourselves consume, I guess.
And more so for children. Because, if you look at history and you read a lot about trauma and intergenerational trauma, and Gabor Mate speaks so beautifully on trauma. And he says, it's not what happens to you, it's what happens inside of you as a result of what happens to you that leads to you holding on to that trauma. And, back in World War II and stuff, with everything that was going on, you kind of, if you were living, say, in the States, but it was happening in Europe, you kind of figured out somehow, through telex or whatever it was back then, that something was happening, but you didn't see it, like when I learned about any of that sort of stuff, it was by reading fiction books, as in my 20s and more recently. And I just remember thinking, how did that happen? And now actually the thing I struggle with the most, and I'm sure a lot of people can resonate with this, is that we now live in a world where we know exactly what is going on, and yet we say, how is this happening? And there's nothing we can do about it. So those feelings of helplessness are far more damaging than like sort of burying our head in the sand and not knowing what's going on. And I worry for the children because, again, with social media, like my son was saying to me that his friend, keeps posting stuff, and he's like, oh, mama, he really like feels it. And we had a whole conversation, and I'm like, yeah, it's really sad. But do I need my 12-year-old looking at images like that that are going to sit within his body for the rest of his life?
Yeah, forever.
I don't. I don't. So I think we need to be quite vigilant about what, kids have phones. There's not a lot we can do about it. We need to be vigilant about what we're allowing them to see, because the trauma that sits within them, we need to give it enough importance. I think that really sits with you for a long time.
Yeah, that's so true. Actually, I was going to ask you, in your actual role, you probably see a lot of people in trauma. So how do you deal with that? Because you can feel traumatic for them, kind of thing. You can feel the kind of empathy that they have towards that whatever situation that they're in, and that's why they feel the trauma. But how do you deal with that? Because obviously you're talking to people who are probably going through something all the time.
Yeah, I think now I'm a stronger person. So I wanted to be a coach or a counselor from the age of 17. And I remember my mum said to me, and rightly so, she was like, you're such an empath, but you haven't built that resilience. And when you see something that's going on with the world, or, someone tells you something, it drains your energy so much, to the point that I would often get sick, because I'm like, oh my God, that's happening to them. And I would take on all that energy.
Yeah.
And I think now the reason that I do, and I do hear some really hard stories, especially, women who've experienced quite a bit of, abuse, and just think, well, but better the devil I know, maybe I'll just stay here, because the fear of the uncertainty kind of holds them back. And I think, sorry, I lost my train of thought.
That's okay. No worries. Shall I ask the question again?
No, I was talking about... Oh gosh, I completely lost it. What was I saying?
So I was asking you about how you kind of deal with the trauma, and then you said you do hear some really traumatic stories.
So I think now with me, I am a lot stronger, having been through the experiences myself. But also I will do a lot of grounding exercises. I will, try and put myself in a bubble so it's not, affecting me. I'm a little old-fashioned. I still get my mum to, I don't know if you've heard of it, but like with salt, my mum's dad, my nana, used to do this for me. They put salt and then they go around you, because salt is quite a purifying crystal as such. And so almost taking that energy away from you. So I'll still sometimes get her to do it. I'll come back from somewhere where I feel like I've given a lot of my energy, especially if I'm a hugger. So I did a couple of weeks ago, for example, I was speaking at an event, and I gave the opportunity to people to speak, and someone spoke and, was really vulnerable, and she started crying, and I waited till she finished and then just said, can I come and give you a hug? And just held her for about 25 seconds, because I'm a big believer in the sharing of that energy. And also, I think a lot of us just need to be hugged.
It's so true. I so agree with you. Because sometimes I do feel like, I just need a hug.
And it does so much with regards to reducing cortisol levels, reducing stress. And I think children are naturally intuitive. I know we're kind of going off on what we're saying, but children are naturally intuitive. Like my son will often just come up to me, sometimes on days where he thinks he needs it, like 3 or 4 times a day, and he will just come and give me a hug and hold on. And I remember seeing something on Instagram. It's good for some things. And I remember seeing something that said, if your child comes up and gives you a hug, let them let go. And I remember the first time I did that, because sometimes I'm like, okay, I'm doing something, and I just didn't. And he just held on for it was 45, 50 seconds, and he just held on. Oh. And then he let go, and I thought maybe he needed that. And so coming back to what you're saying about the energy, so at an event, I will do that, but it means when I come home, I need to do something. I need to do something that just allows me to remove that energy from my space. Yeah. Okay.
I was going to ask you, actually, this might be part of what you've already said about grounding techniques, etc. How do you prioritize your own mental health?
Great question. I don't always do it well.
I think that's everyone's story.
Yeah. But so, for example, in June, and at the end of May, I was really struggling. And in June, I thought, you know what, I'm just going to take a break from Instagram. I found like there was so much grief that I was seeing. There was so much going on, and even though, like I said, I create my Instagram to really see what I want to see, you can't help it, right? People share stuff. Yeah. And so I took myself off it. And it's really interesting because I didn't delete the app. I just logged out of it, but then I moved it because I have little folders on my phone, and I moved it like
so
two down side to swipe.
Uh-huh.
Can I tell you, Amrita, the number of times my finger went to my phone and tapped in the space where it was.
It's the habit, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the habit. It tapped in the space, and I'm like, oh, it's not there. And that happened for the first like 2 to 3 days. And also that demonstrated just how unconscious we are about how often we go to tap into these things when we're bored, and
absolutely,
you know, all of that. And so,
but did you end up going and opening that wherever you'd moved it, or did you just, oh, it's not there, oh yeah, I'm taking a break?
I took a break. I stayed off it completely. I felt so much better for it. Really? I stayed off it. I spent, you know, I wasn't like sort of meditating, but I spent a couple of minutes just doing some visualization or meditation in the morning. But you know, the world still goes on. You're still having the fun, even if you're not showcasing it on stories. You're still having the fun.
Yeah.
You're still doing all the things that you want to do, and the world carries on. And so, if
you don't need to tell anyone, right?
Yeah.
Or you don't need to tell anyone in the social media world.
Yeah. And so I think just having that, being okay with letting go of the idea of FOMO and embracing JOMO, joy of missing out.
Love that, the joy of missing out.
Missing out, yeah. So moving away from that, I think it's literally just about prioritizing what matters to you. And, you know, people will come up with so many excuses. Oh, no, but my work will be affected. Oh, no, but I have to do this. Oh, no, but how will I know what's going on? Oh, no, I have to keep an eye on that. And I'm like, actually, what is the most important thing to you? And actually, I find that when you ask yourself questions, which is why coaching is really powerful, because the role of a coach is actually not, it's not like a therapist. We're not telling you anything. We're asking you questions to get you to come to those realizations. When you ask yourself questions, your brain goes into the mode of trying to find solutions for you. So even if you're asking yourself questions like, why is that important? Or do I really need that? Or is that fact? Or what will really happen? And then you say it out loud, you really see where you're looking for excuses versus, you know, so just prioritize yourself.
It's so true. I feel like I would just come up with 1,000,001 excuses in that, in the first kind of reaction.
Yeah.
But then you do kind of realize that, hold on.
Yeah. Or the other question is, when I say yes to this, what am I saying no to? Right? So it's like, when I say yes, you know, to like going out this evening, even though I've got all this stuff, what am I saying no to? And when you have to actually acknowledge and be like, oh, I'm saying no to, you know, finally doing my accounts or whatever it is, or finally doing my tax returns, or, you know, whatever it may be, finally sending off that email or pitching that book or whatever it is. When I say yes to this, I'm saying no to that. Do I want to say no to that? Like, what's more important to me right now? You know, and then constantly reframing. You know, just constantly reframing and asking yourself the questions to kind of get you back to what really matters, which is you.
Yeah. And I was going to say that actually sometimes I feel like I do that. I try to prioritize myself to a point and say yes to, even if it's just spending the day by myself, doing whatever I want to do. I'm saying no to, I don't know, I've taken a day off work for it. So I'm saying no to work. I'm saying no to the stress and just giving myself a break. And I think I think for me, it's become really important to understand that maybe in that moment, that's what I need. I need that break. I need that time to myself to kind of center myself again, maybe give myself a little bit of a refresh, go to a spa or something. And I think that's okay as well, isn't it? That even if you do have important things that you're saying no to for a few hours or a day, you can pick those things back up again, but do it in terms of whatever you need. Don't think, oh, my responsibilities here, this person needs this. If it's important, yeah, fair enough.
Of course.
But it is okay to give yourself that priority as well. I think it's really important to do that. As they say, fill your own cup before you can fill someone else's, right?
Exactly that. And, you know, that's it, right? There's so much nuance to it. It's not just put yourself first. No. Yes, put yourself first where needed, but just know that sometimes other things will take priority and sometimes this will, and only you can gauge what's really important.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Natasha, it's been so fascinating. I feel like I could talk to you forever.
Yeah,
but I can't. I'm so sorry. I'm going to actually, I'll ask you if there's anything else that you wanted to mention first that hasn't been mentioned. The one thing that I had in my very, very small list of notes is about the retraining of the mind in terms of when you said women and men of colour and the cultural patterns. If we can just delve into that a little bit, and then hopefully we can wrap up on a high, if that's okay. So I just wanted to ask you, what are the biggest challenges with that and trying to understand for us, firstly, the cultural patterns, because obviously different households or different cultures have different patterns. And how do you even start to try breaking that down and getting people to understand that this is actually a cultural pattern that you're experiencing in your feelings?
Yeah, it's a tough one. It takes a lot of time. I think the very, very, very first step is awareness. Just be aware of the things that you don't like, that might be going on. Sometimes, so I would say to people, okay, get a notebook and write down the things that in your body feel uncomfortable when they come up. So where are you walking on eggshells, in your life? Where are you feeling fear when it comes to talking to someone? Because, for example, if you're in a relationship, but you feel like you can't tell your partner, or you're married and you can't tell your husband something because you're afraid of his reaction, that's something that you would write down.
Right?
Yeah. The second thing is, just know that just because it's common doesn't make it normal.
All right. Yeah.
Or normal, all right. The number of people I've said that to in the last couple of weeks is just because it's common. Because so often people are like, but that's just the way it is. Everybody does that. And you can look around and be like, all partners are like that. That's just the way, Indian women are. That's just the way Indian men are, or South Asian women or South Asian men. So just because it's common doesn't make it normal, all right. The third thing is, I would say, start to look for instances of things or people that are in situations that you do like or that you do want to feel, so it's a long process. Like now I can say, I can look at my cultural conditioning and spot very quickly when something is coming up for me, but that's taken years. That's taken years of, well, first being aware that it was even affecting me, and then thinking about how is this affecting me. And it still affects me. It's a work in progress. It's not like you arrive. You don't ever get there and arrive and be like, cool, I'm not, I don't have any cultural conditioning anymore. I live my life from a complete free space. No, cultural conditioning comes in,
it comes in every direction.
Bites me in the butt all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think just awareness. Start with awareness. Just make a list of, where you feel you're not comfortable with things in your life, and then start, sort of delving deeper to that. And I would say to people, if you can, and if you're in a space and you can afford it, get yourself a coach. Because if you look at any pro athlete, none of them have gotten to where they are without a coach. Or if it's someone who's done something phenomenal in the business space, most of the time they had a mentor. Like, everybody has somebody. And so I think sometimes it's and sometimes that can be your best friend, right? If you're lucky enough to have a friend who can be objective, who doesn't have the same conditioning as you do, I'll give you an example. When I left my marriage, my best friend, she's Irish, she sat me down and she said, I need you to know that this was abuse. Because I remember thinking, oh, but at least if I don't get hit, then whatever. Because conditioning, South Asian conditioning will tell you like, oh, but he didn't raise his hand.
Yeah. And there's different types of abuse.
Exactly. But this was also 11 years ago. So, back then it wasn't spoken about the way it's spoken about now. A lot has changed in the last decade. And she said, I need you to know that was abuse. And having someone kind of show you things that you didn't even see because your conditioning didn't allow you to see that, I think that's really, really, that's really crucial. So yeah, if you're not in the space to get a coach, then, even having someone objective who can see things outside of the culture the way that you can't see it.
I think that's so interesting, because I feel like a lot of people reacting to someone telling them straight, this is what this is, and seeing it from the outside point of view and trying to make you understand. A lot of the time, because you are so deeply conditioned, you kind of oppose that. That's not what it is. Of course, that's not what it is. You're just seeing it differently, kind of thing. And I think that's important as well, that you let that person show you that different perspective, even if you don't agree to start with or anything. I think it's really important that you listen to the people who care about you as well.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, like we said, comprehension, right?
Exactly.
If that person can say it until they're blue in the face, if the opposite person doesn't understand.
And also, I think
It's
if
not
you
going
feel
anywhere.
resistance, question that as well. Because
true.
resistance will come up. Why? Because our body's trying to protect us. She's saying something that isn't even in my, like, you know, in my brain or something that I've thought about. And so if there's resistance, question your resistance as well. And
So interesting. Thank you so much.
oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
I feel like this whole topic could go on for a whole episode.
Yeah.
There's so much to say.
And then let's
but
lighten it up.
Thank you. Yes. So I'm going to, as everyone will know from our second season, we end with, or I end, should I say, I should need to stop saying we, with a this or that section, just to kind of make it a bit lighthearted and find out another part of you, I guess, in the 6 questions that I have.
I'm ready.
So let's go. I'm glad you are ready. Okay. Eat out or take away?
Eat out.
Any particular reason?
I like being amongst people.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's nice.
I mean, you can take away and eat out with people at home, but I like the environment.
I was just about to say it's about the ambience, isn't it?
Yeah.
Party host or party guest?
Party host.
Oh, love it.
Yeah.
I love that. I can so see you as a host. Slow mornings or evenings at home? Could even choose both in this.
I think evenings at home. Yeah, I'm a morning person. I'm like up and out.
fair enough.
Yeah, so evenings at home.
So no, you don't necessarily have a slow morning then. You're a morning person.
I don't think I ever have I don't know what a slow morning is.
Oh, there you go. You've answered it already.
Yeah.
Okay. Side by side or face to face?
Side by side.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, side by side. But there's actually a lot of kind of science behind that as well, with regards to like the conversations that you're able to have. And this is more specifically with men. So even within the coaching space or therapy, what's really popular with men now is to have walking coaching or walking therapy, because, or I should say actually driving, because if a man is speaking and he's beside walking, alongside you or driving alongside you, he's more likely to open up in a way that he wouldn't if he was sitting across from you, where it would feel quite confrontational and not say things. So side by side, yeah.
That's
People
really
are a lot more
interesting.
vulnerable side by side.
I like that. I think it makes sense as well, because it feels like you're with an ally in that way, maybe.
Yeah.
With someone walking beside you.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but that's what it feels like to me. Sunrise or sunset?
Oh, sunrise, I think. 'Cause
Oh,
I'm
you're
a morning
you're
person.
I was just going to say, that's kind of the same question again.
Yeah. No, but I used to, when I was super hectic, when I was like teaching, coaching, and running a family business and trying to do it all and working insane hours, I would wake up at like just before 6 o'clock. And I live pretty close to Primrose Hill. And this was like, I remember in October, November, when the sun rose like a little bit later, and I would just do the hills. So I would walk up the steepest part, go down, walk up the steepest part. But up until I'd say the second week of December, what I loved about it is when I got to 6:30, the sun would start coming up over London, and I just loved that. And then as it went into December, it didn't come up until probably like 7, and I had to be home to leave for work. So
At least you got it in some of the time.
yeah, and it was stunning.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay, last one. Hoarder or minimalist?
I'm laughing because if you'd asked me this, I'm both. Can I tell you why I'm both? Okay. So I used to be someone who hoarded. I mean, I still have my diaries from when I was 10 years old. And a couple of years ago, my Nani wrote my mum a letter. And my mum knew that if she gave it to me, I hoard, right? So she gave it to me to keep. And earlier this year, my Nani passed away. And then on Mother's Day, my mum was really thinking of her. And I'm like, hold on, I have something for you. And I knew exactly where it was, pulled it out and gave it to her. And she had tears in her eyes because it was like a letter, right, that her mum wrote. And she goes, I don't even remember this letter, let alone give it. I was like, that's why you gave it to me. So
It pops up at the right time.
I'm a hoarder. But more recently, I have also just been giving everything away and decluttering because I just find that we actually don't need as much as we think we need. So whether it's, my wardrobe or just like the clutter or the paperwork I've kept for ages, and then in terms of like sort of manifesting all this other stuff, we need space in our lives, and decluttering is a huge part of that. And I'm not one of those people who will say, I'm going to keep these dresses a friend of mine does some work like with Marie Kondo, right?
Okay.
And she told me, so now it's like, pick it up. Do I feel joy? Have I worn it? No, I'm not. If I haven't worn it for 6 years, I'm not going to wear it in 6 years.
Yeah.
Get rid of it.
So
So I'm both. I hoard, but I'm also a minimalist.
I think I agree with you. I need to do stuff like that.
Yeah.
That kind of declutter. Not worn it for like a
Yeah.
year even.
And
I
you
think
feel
it can
it.
go.
You feel that sense of like lightness when you do something like that. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it is actually amazing how much you do feel that actually.
Yeah.
Because I did it. When did I do it? I think about 2 months ago. I went through my wardrobe and got rid of perfectly good clothes, just that I didn't wear them or they didn't fit me anymore. Because I think a lot of us have a habit of, I can lose the weight, it will fit me again, and then you have like a whole shelf of just clothes like that, just taking up space.
Yeah.
So I let them all go. I was like, if I lose weight, I will just buy more.
Yeah, and your style might have changed too.
Yeah, it's so true.
Yeah.
Which I think, yeah, it probably has because they were very old.
Yeah.
I don't know what they were doing. Thank you, Natasha. It's been really I think a revelation talking to you about so many different topics. I think we could have delved further into any one of them.
Next season.
Next season. There you go. Next season.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much. Take care. So actually, let me ask you, where do we find you on social media before we sign off?
So I'm Natasha Coaches across all, so Natasha and then COACHES across X. Instagram is my main place really. It's like where I go to.
Amazing. There you go. If you want to get hold of her, that's where you find her. And so we'll be back soon. Obviously you can catch us on Voice It Out podcast everywhere. And again, similar to Natasha, we are mostly active on Instagram. And I just want to say, remember that we don't want to keep it in. We want to voice it out. Bye.